If the president decides that his rival is a corrupt person and he orders the military or orders someone to assassinate him, is that within his official acts that for which he can get immunity?
It would depend on the hypothetical, but we can see that could well be an official act.
You cannot make this up. Donald Trump's lawyer wants us all to think that ordering the military to assassinate a political rival could be seen as an official act of the presidency. Marcus and Ankush are back with us. We crazy.
I mean, for either of you, really, one of my biggest questions that as I've been watching this Supreme Court and others over the years is the discussion of executive power and how it's expanded. And it seems like this could happen here, right? If they push this down and then Trump becomes president, this case it's a wrap, right? His people have already said that. So I guess when you think about the historical implications of the expanded powers of the executive branch, how concerned should people be if that's what happens here?
I think that's what we've been seeing since Donald Trump was in office, is like tearing down the checks and balances on decisions that he was making. I mean, that's what he was trying to do with overturning the election. There are checks and balances of Congress to certify the election for a reason, and he was trying to subvert that by going to state legislatures or pressuring the DOJ. I mean, that has kind of been a theme since 2016. Yeah. And this is just a furtherance of that theme of now, look, we're talking about the credibility of the court here today. We're talking about the credibility of our elections. And these are all core institutions that keep our democracy going. And it's just literally been a continuing derivative effect since Donald Trump was first elected.
I want to start with you, Marcus, because you were in the room, but then I want your analysis on this too, Ankush, which is another court observer said to me that they had never seen Justice Roberts so uncomfortable.
It felt tense in there. And when I talked to my family afterwards, I said this felt like the first January 6th committee hearing, that first primetime hearing we did, where it felt you could just cut through the air. But that was because we wanted the American people to see that we got it right. It felt like the Supreme Court is hoping that it gets it right. And that's what I could tell. But wait,
what is right? Is right by the law, or is right by
I told you, McGann, I hope they get it right by the law. But you could tell folks felt uncomfortable, or they felt the gravity of the moment.
What did they look like?
So you had certain justices who were like really leaned over, like not really looking at the advocates. You had others that were talking to each other. I mean, it looked like they weren't necessarily aligned on where this line should be, or if there should be a line at all. And that's why I thought some of these hypotheticals were so outrageous, because you felt that justices were putting markers in the sand of like, we cannot go this far. Like, we cannot say that we're in a monarchy. Justice Kagan brought up a monarchy. We cannot talk about having a coup. We cannot allow these type of powers to exist. And then you had the Chief Justice, as the other commentator said, kind of sitting there quiet. And Lord knows what was going through his mind, but this will be a decision that will live on forever.
Well, it's about the legitimacy of the presidency. It's about the legitimacy of the court, and it becomes about Robert's legacy.
It does. I mean, I think this has a real... I'm fascinated to hear all that, actually, truly fascinated, because... maybe he's been reading some of the polling, and he realizes that this is actually a politically perilous situation for the Supreme Court. And yesterday, on Thursday, the scene must have been very uncomfortable for him. A third of the justices on the court were appointed by Trump. Thomas should not have even been there yesterday. He should be recused. His wife is a victim of the alleged crimes, having been duped by Trump and his allies of false claims of election fraud. Thomas should be recused. And yet he was there listening to this case. Again, it was a disgrace.
I'm just going to play this piece of sound. This is Justice Kavanaugh on the Nixon pardon. Okay, he had this exchange with a lawyer from the Justice Department who was representing the special counsel on Thursday.
President Ford's pardon, very controversial in the moment.
Yes.
Hugely unpopular, probably why he lost in '76.
Yes.
Now looked upon as one of the better decisions in presidential history, I think, by most people. If he's thinking about, well, if I grant this pardon to Richard Nixon, could I be investigated myself for obstruction of justice on the theory that I'm interfering with the investigation of Richard Nixon?
So this would fall into that small core area that I mentioned to Justice Kagan and Justice Gorsuch of presidential responsibilities that Congress cannot regulate.
One of our favorite presidential historians here, Michael Beschloss, he tweeted, "I don't think most people agree that there's not widespread agreement about the pardon of Nixon by Ford." But many other things came up in this conversation. Can a president pardon himself? Is that something we should be weighing in on here? And it was Justice Jackson that really, at the end, brought the conversation back to, why can't we just decide the question before us?
Yeah, you're exactly right to be asking that question. The thing I want to say is that framing, all of this framing about, we're setting a rule for the future, we're concerned about the hypotheticals, that is a deliberate choice. Yeah. It is a deliberate choice that these conservative justices have made. They can and should have done what the D.C. Circuit did, which is address the allegations in the indictment and resolve the case that is in front of them. They are deliberately complicating this.
And that's a big difference between the lower court rulings and the questions from the Supreme Court, was that the lower courts were focused on the crimes at hand. Can a president be immune for trying to overthrow an election? And to Ankush's point, we did not hear a lot of facts on Thursday at all about the crimes at hand. And Mr. Dreeben...
They said they didn't want to hear about them.
They said they didn't want to hear about it.
I don't want to get into the details of this case. Well, why are we here?
And I think that's concerning, right? Because they're talking about preventing this type of conduct in the future. And as many advocates have said, for 200 years, we haven't had this type of conduct in our country. And so why are we concerned about it for the future? And I think, again, that just goes onto the derivative effect of Donald Trump's actions in the presidency and the prospect that we could be looking at it again.
So if you were part of the 70% of Americans who agree that the president should not have absolute immunity, and then you watch what transpired this week in court, what is left as recourse, right? There's court reform, there's stacking the court. What do you see as the path forward? Because clearly something more structural is necessary.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think actually, as we think about, this administration and its legacy, I think it will go down as having been a historic political miscalculation.
You're talking about the Biden administration.
The Biden administration to not have made a real earnest effort at Supreme Court reform. They put together a commission that produced some report that nobody read. It was not a serious effort to actually pursue Supreme Court reform. And now,
well, I would know, because the President Biden, I mean, I worked for him at that time. I was a part of the transition, and I worked in the White House, and I know for a fact, and I mean, Eugene, you didn't ask him the questions too. I was there. He himself does not believe that is an avenue that should be explored. Joe Biden is somebody that believes in the rules and laws and the systems. And one could argue, Ankush is basically like, it's time to do things differently.
Well, look, I mean, yeah, I'm aware he has that view. He is holding the wrong view. I hate to say that about the president. He's been wrong about this the whole time. And now this court, over the last few years, is systematically running roughshod through our Constitution. In just the last few years, they've overturned Roe. They've invalidated affirmative action in higher education. They basically legalized same-sex discrimination. They threw out part of the Biden administration's signature domestic policy effort on the student loan forgiveness plan. And now they seem poised to issue some sort of ruling that will change the law, which had already been in place for a couple hundred years. We all assumed a president could be criminally charged after leaving office, to now come up with some crazy new doctrine. And
to say nothing of the Idaho case that they are listening to right now, which is like all of their chickens coming home to roost.
Oh, yeah, and it's like, we don't want to save women.
All of the cases coming back to them after Dobbs is a mess. And this immunity ruling, if it comes out as I think most of us kind of are expecting, it will go down in history as a practical effect, as a practical matter, as a sequel to Bush versus Gore.
No, I saw our good friend Andrew Weissman talking about the lower courts, what they can do in response, and that's just where I'm hoping it goes. Those of us, Ankush, I'm probably in your experience trying these evidentiary hearings, you actually can get more evidence in an evidentiary hearing before the judge than you can for a jury. And so if this is remanded, I hope that the American people can learn of the facts that...
You are really our signature.
Give us hope, Marcus.
I'm trying. I'm going to.
Let me ask you, Marcus, because sometimes when we talk about what happened at the court and you look at the volley, it gets framed as like, it was not a good day for Jack Smith's team, right? Which, was there anything Dreeben and his team could have done differently, or was this whole thing
Absolutely not. Ankush and I were talking about this before. Dreeben put on one of the better oral arguments I've ever listened to or witnessed.
He was excellent.
He was excellent. And in fact was able to go where the court was going with these hypotheticals to his fallback position of going with Justice Barrett of like, that's a private act, we can try this case because another thing is in the outer perimeter. I mean, he was there was nothing he could have done. And I think that's why the justices spent an hour and 45 minutes with him and only just short of an hour with Trump's attorney, because he was that good on his feet. And I think they were trying to find the line that they can make this opinion with, which I think we all know it's probably going to be remanded for further proceedings. I think they were trying to find that line of what's reasonable through Dreeben.
Week 3 of Donald Trump's 2016 election interference trial begins Tuesday. During week 2, David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, said he bought negative stories about Trump to keep them out of the press, a process known as catch and kill. Lachlan Cartwright, the Enquirer's executive editor at the time, writes this month in the New York Times, quote, "I had been managing a newsroom with improvised explosive devices planted everywhere, where Pecker told Michael Cohen he would act as the campaign's eyes and ears, a scheme to influence the 2016 election." Lachlan Cartwright, who's now a special correspondent for The Hollywood Reporter, joins us now. What a strange week for America. What a strange week for you, I imagine.
A surreal week to be in court and to see David Pecker, who I've not seen since I left American media in the summer of 2017, and then see him detail in forensic detail to the jury, what was going on at this meeting where he goes to see Trump and Michael Cohen at Trump Tower just a couple of months after Trump announces he's running. And he says, after being asked, what can you do for us? What can you do for the campaign? He says, I'll be the eyes and ears. I'll purchase negative stories off the market and I'll run negative stories about your rivals while also promoting Donald Trump. Everything that I thought could potentially be going on, in real time as we're running these hit pieces, as I'm hearing about Karen McDougal, and I'd whisper to friends late at night in bars and say, there's something going on here. I think there could be some kind of deal. And then look at me and say, Lachlan, chill out. You sound like a conspiracy theorist. Now I'm actually hearing it being confirmed by David Pecker in court. And my friends are now calling me back going, well, sorry, you weren't that crazy. It actually turns out. Well, I thought there was a potential of something going on, because we're running these coordinated hit pieces, Simone, week in, week out. Hillary, 6 months to live. Ted Cruz's father is involved with Lee Harvey Oswald. As one candidate's up in the polls, we're running a hit piece. And it seemed like there was some type of coordination, but I had no proof to go on. And then you had sort of the other thing that was going on with these catch and kills. That we've gone through the process with Dino the doorman, paid him $30,000, which was a large sum of money to pay someone for a story, but also a story we weren't even running. And then when Dylan Howard told me about Karen McDougal, he said, I've just gone out to Los Angeles. I've interviewed this woman. She has a credible story about an affair with Donald Trump. I thought, brilliant. This is the type of scoop I came here to break. When are we running it? We're not. David Pecker has made the decision, he said, to buy the story, to kill it. And I thought, in what world are we living?
I just want to know, did you ever ask why? Why are we paying for these?
I said, what was going on here? He said, this is something that David has decided, and that was that. So
you said in your Times column, you regret your 3 years there. Was the regret around this, the ethics of catch and kill? Was it around the elevation of Donald Trump? We all have regrets, but what was the source of that regret?
I had a journalism life before American media. I was at the New York Post. I was at the Daily News. I was papers in London. I came to AMI to break significant, agenda-setting, impactful stories such as what would have been the Karen McDougal story. And instead, we're running these hit pieces where, the American media was turned into a criminal enterprise to protect the rich and powerful, and it became a propaganda machine. And that's not something I'd signed up for.
Let's touch on, you used the term criminal enterprise, because David Pecker's testimony got to a line that I was just talking to you about, and I'm curious about this. The ability of Alvin Bragg to bring felony charges on business fraud is because there was a secondary crime alleged of election interference. Pecker seemed to cut off some of his testimony as though there was a bit of attorney-client privilege for AMI for himself on perhaps counsel he had received. Give us a look into behind the scenes at AMI. You had to have been getting some type of legal counsel from your general counsel or outside counsel, whether or not catch and kill was in violation of federal election law at the time, in real time. Was that counsel available to you? Was it modifying the behavior of Pecker and others?
So what we've learned subsequent is that David Pecker was getting this legal guidance from the general counsel, who in one case actually outsourced someone to look at the Karen McDougal agreement. And that person, as we're learning in court, took half an hour to come back and say, this contract is safe to go, is good to go, because they're looking at a contract with all these provisions saying we're buying these fitness columns, we're buying these covers. That's how they were spinning this. That's how they were structuring Karen McDougal's deal. But as Dylan Howard told me, I'd gone out to Los Angeles to buy this story, to bury it, to take it off the market. There was no mention of fitness columns. That actually came later, after the Wall Street Journal broke the story, and I was the one that was instructed, hey, we now need to come up with these fitness columns. I had to assign a ghostwriter. The ghostwriter got Karen McDougal on the phone and was cribbing fitness tips from the internet. And the first column ran, and Karen McDougal called David Pecker in a rage because there was something in that column about vitamin C, and she wasn't okay with vitamin C, and so we had to get a new ghostwriter.
Karen McDougal didn't even do the fitness columns, and it was ghostwritten. I mean, Lord, she does look good. We do have obviously there's no sound coming out of court, but I do want to read for folks what this exchange that David Jolly is talking about. Pecker didn't want to purchase the Stormy Daniels story. That was part of the one of the bombshells, if you will, this past week in court from Thursday. Pecker says, Michael Cohen asked me to pay for the story to purchase it. I said, I'm not purchasing this story. I'm not going to be involved with the porn star. And I am not, which I immediately said, a bank. After paying out the doorman and paying out Karen McDougal, we're not paying any more monies. Prosecution said, how did Michael Cohen take that? Pecker, he was upset. He said that the boss would be furious at me and that I should go forward in purchasing it. The boss was Trump.
Yeah, I mean, he was annoyed that they'd put up, AMI, we had put up $30K for the doorman and then $150K for Karen McDougal, which he hadn't been paid back. So by the time Stormy Daniels comes on the scene, which is right off the Access Hollywood tape, which is crucial in the timing of what was going on in the thought process of not just AMI and David Pecker, but also the Trump campaign and Michael Cohen. But by the time that situation comes on, David Pecker, as he said, I'm not a bank. Like you guys have to handle this transaction, and that's ironically why we're here, because of the structure that Michael Cohen then went and did this hush money deal.
I felt very much that this week was about substantiating the catch and kill scheme so that the jury could understand that there was some legalese that, if you've ever been in a courtroom, was not necessarily being metabolized by the majority of the jury. It's legalese, hard to follow. It's not the storytelling piece of this. The question is going to become about the way in which these payments were recorded, right? The way in which, and that, I think, that becomes the harder piece then to substantiate.
Yeah, and look, it's clear that what was the thought process with David Pecker, and he spoke about this on the stand. They had the whole situation with Arnold Schwarzenegger several years ago where they did these type of payments, which were campaign finance issues. And in this case, they thought there was some danger. He thought he had some exposure with the Karen McDougal deal, hence why he got that further legal advice.
Just real quick, one of the things that came up this week was Pecker revealing that Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Hope Hicks had discussed the McDougal agreement. Do you have a sense of what Hope Hicks is going to be able to offer the courtroom?
I think why Hope Hicks is going to play an important part, just like David Pecker. She can help set the table what was being discussed in that crucial meeting in August of 2015. Before Michael Cohen gets up on the stand and before the defense really goes for his credibility, they can ascertain the contents of this meeting via David Pecker, who did a great job, I think, this week of really setting the table, and then have that backed up with Hope Hicks. And then also, crucially, with Hope, she was on the phone with a lot of those Stormy Daniels conversations with Dylan Howard, who was my editor, the editor-in-chief of the National Enquirer, and Michael Cohen, as they are furiously trying to sort the situation out in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape.
I will just note we talked about the importance of the White House journalists who cover the White House. Sarah Huckabee Sanders obviously was the press secretary. There were questions about this. Donald Trump himself lied on camera about this many times. Who knows what Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Hope Hicks, and other folks within the press operation knew about this and were concealing from the press, not only the press, the American people.
Is the only thing we have in common. My vice president actually endorses me. I had a great stretch since the State of the Union. Well, Donald has had a few tough days lately. You might call it stormy weather. What the hell?
President Biden making a few jokes. He really did hit in the room last night about his rivals, at his rivals' expense at last night's White House Correspondents' Dinner. The president, though, he also got serious, and he warned about the very real dangers of a second Trump term. We played that sound for you. And joining us now to discuss it all is Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida, who was in the room last night. Good to see you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Congressman, you know, I am very aware that most people are not following. They don't have the luxury of following all of this the way that we all do. We all, especially when we have young kids, you're a stepmommy. Like, you know, the TV is turned to Bluey. It's not turned to the Donald Trump trials most of the day. I do think, though, that the environment we now find ourselves in, even if you are not watching it minute to minute, there is a generalized sense that Trump is now in the court of law, that is his context. And whether or not you know the details of it, it puts him in that criminal light. And then Joe Biden is on the trail, is out there selling the accomplishments of his administration, and he's doing the work of being president of the United States. So even if you just know that top line, that already creates a pretty sharp contrast.
Yeah, and I think you can see that in just how the communications has changed over the last couple of months, both from the President Biden's standpoint and the campaign, and President Trump. President Trump's out there talking about how the courtroom is cold, super cold, right. You know, they're doing it on purpose, can't seem to get the temperature correct, right? Like, that's what he's talking about. And Biden's out there talking about what he's done for the country and what he's going to do. Like, I don't even know what Trump's agenda is for the future. He doesn't talk about that. He talks about himself and in the courtroom. And that, I think, is one of the things why you're seeing is now that the President Biden is messaging, right, I think you're seeing the polls starting to move.
So whether or not it's the criminal culpability that Trump's facing, whether it's a contrast of ideas, whether it's the economy going in the right direction, all the things that put the wind at Biden's sails right now, there is a rumbling out there that I don't think we've talked about a lot. Mm-hmm. There's a confidence among many. In fact, your colleague Jamie Raskin on a panel a week or two ago said Joe Biden's going to win this thing big. And you could see Jamie Harrison saying, like, Joe Biden's doing very well. But there's this thinking among a lot of Democrats, you got to work it, but that Joe Biden's actually going to win this race big. And it's kind of a contravention, certainly to some of the polls we've seen, but also just to the conventional wisdom that this is neck and neck. Where do you come down on forecasting November?
Well, look, I think Joe Biden is gonna win the race, right? But we shouldn't take anything for granted. We shouldn't look at Trump's troubles in the courtroom and think like this moment in time is where we're going to be in September or October. So I think the Biden campaign is in full swing, right? They're raising the money. They're going out and messaging. They're talking to the American people. They're talking about the accomplishments. They're talking about the real struggles, right? Like the price of food, the price of gas is still an issue. What are we going to do about that? Rather than Trump just saying, here's the problem with no solution, Joe Biden's out there talking about the solutions. And so Democrats can be confident, but we got to put the work in.
Those are the managed expectations of a Florida Democrat.
Well, you know, I did serve in the minority my entire life in the legislature.
Let's follow up on Florida.
Yeah, please.
So 6-week abortion ban goes into effect maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. There's a ballot initiative about reproductive freedom that says no law can infringe on abortion services, pre-viability, or if the health of the mother is in question. However, Republicans continue to outpace Democrats in registration now by almost 1 million people.
Right.
Is Florida in play in November?
Well, I think it is in play because of the ballot initiatives. Make no mistake about it. Without those ballot initiatives, I don't think Florida's in play. I think Florida is now a red state. I mean, you're talking about 4 years ago, Democrats had about a 200,000, voter difference, more registered Democrats and Republicans. Now it's 900,000.
Yeah.
Right. And so Republicans have invested a ton of money. This is what happens when you're in the minority in the state in leadership for, 35 years. It has repercussions. They've gerrymandered the seats. And so they control everything, the House, the Senate, the whole cabinet. But they've made a mistake with the 6-week ban. I mean, they're to the right of Donald Trump. Right, on the 6-week ban, right? Like, who are they appealing to? The flat earthers? Like, I don't understand who that was for, the 6-week ban. So Florida and Arizona have a lot in common, as far as what their policy is towards women. And so, look, we hope that there's a big vote, but it's got to hit 60%. Right. For us to change, it's got to hit 67%. But what people in Florida need to understand is they have a choice. It's either 6 weeks, because the court said that was okay, unless they vote for the constitutional amendment. So this is Florida's chance, obviously, to get rid of a 6-week abortion ban, which is an all-out ban. Let's just be clear.
Yes, but 6 weeks is before most women even know that they are pregnant. And if I don't know I'm pregnant, how can I have a complication? And that has an exception. So the exceptions are really a word I'm not allowed to say on television because children are watching. I just really appreciate what you said about Democrats need to temper their expectations. Like, it's going to be, you think that Joe Biden's going to win, but people are going to have to work for it. I think that a lot of folks do not travel across the country and talk to real people. And if you travel across the country and talk to real people want to know what Joe Biden and Vice President Harris are going, what a next administration, another 4 years means for them. Real people across the country, they want to know what Speaker Hakeem Jeffries and Democrats holding the Senate means for them. And I think that Democrats have to do more of talking about that. The president and vice president, they make their pitch very well. I'm struggling to hear everybody else say what they need to be saying.
Well, look, you know this. You're in the messaging business, right? They got to go out. It's there for us. Mm-hmm. It is there for us to take. There's no question about that. But we got to go do that. We got to take it. We can't just sit back and say they're not going to vote for Donald Trump, right? We got to go out and we got to explain to people what we've done and what we're going to do. There are still, no matter the jobs numbers, no matter how inflation's coming down, and no matter how the American economy is better than any other country, we've had the best recovery since COVID than any other country, there are still people struggling, right? Food prices are still elevated. We got to talk about what we're going to do about that, right? The cost of living in Florida, the cost of insurance. We got to talk about these things.
Insurance is crazy.
Crazy. If we do that, though, and we tell people what we've done and what we're going to do, right, to your point, not everyone's paying attention, right? They got all this incoming all day. If we message and we tell them, then we're going to win.
There's also this question of sort of at a more macro level, like what kind of country do you want to live in? And what do you want the office of the presidency to be? And there was a moment last night, Colin Jost talking about his own grandfather and his grandfather having voted for President Biden that crystallized that. Take a listen.
My grandfather, a Staten Island firefighter, voted for you, Mr. President. He voted for you in the last election that he ever voted in. I mean, I'm sure someone else will vote twice in this election using his name, but that's just how the Democratic machine works. He voted for you, and the reason that he voted for you is because you're a decent man.
Let me just put a parenthetical in here, which is I worry in the age of disinformation that just gets clipped to be the thing about this is how the Democratic machine works. And there are people who don't understand that is satire. But putting that aside, the line he lands on, which is, OK, well, fundamentally, there are all of these policy issues you can decide upon. There are threats to democracy. There's extremism. Fundamentally, do you want someone decent or indecent leading this country?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Joe Biden is a decent man. He's a family man. His story is, you know, it's tragedy. It's triumph over tragedy. I mean, it's just his arc is really an unbelievable story that is kind of lost in this moment with everything. But I think when people write about it 15, 20, 30 years from now, and they look at Joe Biden dedicating his entire life to service and really stepping up when the country needed someone like that most, both 4 years ago and again now. Right, where we're at this pivotal moment. I mean, there's, you know, democracy's on the ballot. We say it all the time. It's like people are like so overhearing it, or this is the most important election of your lifetime, right? People are overhearing it. But if Democrats go out and tell people, right, and explain what when we say democracy, what does that mean? What is going to change if it goes the opposite direction? What are you going to lose, right? What do you have now that you're taking for granted that you won't have? Right, we have to make it granular. We have to explain how that's going to affect someone in their everyday life rather than the top line. Democracy is on the ballot. But Joe Biden is a decent man. I mean, think about where we're at right now in the election, right? One of the potential vice presidential candidates, right, that was on the short list, top 3 or 4, you know, is playing Dr. Kevorkian with her puppy, right? Like, that's what is...
She shot the dog and the goat.
Right. Like, this is what is going on that side of the aisle. She's trying to own the libs because you know how I know she's putting in her book. It didn't leak. Like, we found out about it. She was going to trumpet the fact. She was like, yeah, my dog barked. I killed him. Right. That's what's going on right now in the vice presidential search. Amongst Donald Trump. Like, decency is on the ballot.
It is the morning after the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the annual event that celebrates the free press, and where journalists mingle with administration officials, D.C. power players, and a few celebrities. SNL star Colin Jost headlined the event, throwing more than a few jabs at Donald Trump into his set. Of course, President Biden also let loose on his opponent. Take a listen.
Trump's so desperate he started reading those Bibles he's selling. Then he got to the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. That's when he put it down and said, this book's not for me. Age is the only thing we have in common. My vice president actually endorses me.
I was about to say the reaction shot from Vice President Harris is the whole thing. Joining us now, former White House Social Secretary for the Obama White House, Deesha Dyer. She is the author of the brand new book, Undiplomatic, How My Attitude Created the Best Kind of Trouble. Welcome.
It's giving, a book that the former First Lady, Mrs. Obama, even posted on Instagram.
Yes,
so not mad about it. Deesha, what did you think of last night's White House Correspondents' Dinner? What you've seen, what you've heard? You've been around these.
I've been around these a lot, and I think, the thing about it is that it was entertaining to me because I wasn't there. I got to sit at home and judge everybody and look at everybody talking to folks and listen to Colin and the vice president and see Eugene. It was really great to see him up there. So I loved it because I was sitting at home relaxing, getting ready for a party. So while y'all were there, so it was great. It was great.
Let me ask you, first of all, congratulations to the two of you all for making it.
She was in slippers in a hotel lobby, so.
David Jolly, even I was skeptical this morning.
I will admit, I know I'm the rookie guy here, but they said you have to show up Sunday morning in case we have a problem. Let me ask you, though. So you are the social secretary for the White House.
I was.
Your job is to kind of insist on an exacting standard for every movement, every event, every moment. The power of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, though, inverts that a little bit. It's about the vulnerability of the president. You see a president kind of humble themselves, be self-deprecating. You see them throw some lines that they couldn't throw in another place, right? When he calls Donald Trump a 6-year-old. That's unpresidential in another format, but it works there. There's got to be an anxiety piece to that.
Yeah, of course there is. It's the one time, because we're in a time where people make fun of, both presidential candidates, but President Biden, people make fun of him and they say things. And so it's a chance for him to also make fun of himself, right? And at the expense of everyone, right? And that kind of, to me, shows that, he's willing, to not take himself so seriously when it comes to, being in that kind of environment. And it kind of makes him, humanizes him a little bit. But there definitely is a vulnerability and anxiety because you also don't know what everybody else is going to say.
And they may not be that good at it. They may not be that good at it.
They may not be that good at it, and you could see it. You could see a script, but it may change on the fly.
I think the lesson last night: never underestimate Joe Biden.
Never underestimate Joe Biden. And you know what? It was this year, the past couple of White House Correspondents' Dinners, I feel like are a little more weighty and serious than others. This year, obviously, folks are coming out to have a good time, but the dinner raises money for scholarships for young journalists. But also thinking about just the threat to democracy that we're all living under, the importance of the Fourth Estate, journalists like Evan Gershkovich, who are still detained, wrongfully detained in other countries. It is literally dangerous to go out and report, do the job. The journalists have been killed in Gaza. And I was wondering how the White House Correspondents Association and also the president were going to, address the gravity of the moment. And the president talks about the press, where he alludes to, some refer to you all as the enemy of the people. I want to play this off for people who maybe didn't hear it.
There are some who call you the enemy of the people. That's wrong and it's dangerous. You literally risk your lives doing your job. You do. Covering everything from natural disasters to pandemics to wars and so much more. And some of your colleagues have given their lives, and many have suffered grievous injuries. Other reporters have lost their freedom.
There's something that happens in that room, which is it is a hard room to play to because it is a big room.
Yes.
It is a loud room. And so you have a dual audience. You have the people who are actually in the room, and you have what I would argue is the more important audience, which is the Americans who are watching at home. We're going to watch this in clips. And so as much there as President Biden is speaking to us as journalists about the importance of the Fourth Estate, I would argue that really what he's doing is saying to the American people, there is currently an attack on this institution. You know where that attack is coming from. And I want you, the American people, to remember just how important the role of a fair and free process.
Yeah, 100%. I think even using the word enemy, I think that because that resonates with people at home, being like, that's a major word to use. That's a heavy word to use. I think, really gets people thinking how serious that it is. Not just, what we're seeing right now, but also disinformation, also just AI. There's all types of things. And so I think that when I heard that even, I was like, I perked up. Being like, oh, he actually said that. And he said it in this room and with people watching, and I think all types of people watch the Correspondents' Center, so I think that it was a chance to really say that and be open about it.
It was interesting to me also the sort of 1-2 punch of the president having done Howard Stern, his team having made that decision that, given that there's this critique of the president not having ample accessibility to the press, that they, chose a venue like that. And then you had this as the second piece of it. And I thought one of the most powerful parts of the president's speech last night, to your point about the weightiness of this moment, was the way in which he set the stakes and almost issued a challenge to the press to consider the way that they cover this forthcoming election. Take a listen.
He promised a bloodbath when he loses again. We have to take this seriously. 8 years ago, you could have written off it as just Trump talk, but no longer, not after January 6th. I'm sincerely not asking of you to take sides, but asking you to rise up to the seriousness of the moment. Move past the horse race numbers and the gotcha moments and the distractions, the sideshows that have come to dominate and sensationalize our politics, and focus on what's actually at stake.
It's norm setting, right? It's saying, I know y'all want to talk about poll numbers and who's up, who's down, but please don't get distracted from the fundamental stakes of this election.
This was an incredible moment, I think, because Simone said the context this year is so different than past years, right? There's always a context. What we saw from Joe Biden is talking about attacks on the press as an example of attacks on democracy. And, look, the American experiment is not guaranteed. We're custodians of it. And if there were bulwarks that were built in, you would look at the courts, and now people are questioning, could the courts really protect democracy in this moment? We have legitimate questions. They put in the Congress to protect democracy, but this was a Senate that failed to convict Donald Trump after J6 and disqualify him from office. They put in a vote of the people, right? And even that now looks like maybe the people want to bring in a strong man. And I think what Joe Biden said to the press is, you might be the last bulwark. Like, your job this cycle to the media is to ensure that you are protecting the Constitution. You don't have to choose sides, as he said, but the guiding light has to be, what are the constitutional protections that ensure this American experiment continues? It's a powerful night last night.
It was powerful, and what I don't know if folks saw this on television, but prior to that, Kelly O'Donnell, our colleague who is the current White House Correspondents Association president, Eugene will take over this summer. She, in her remarks, did a kind of a scene setter and a call out to the president. And saying that, like, it's our job to tell the story. We are saying they too are custodians of democracy, and they are the journalists who cover the White House are the public record, and we want to interview.
Yeah, definitely. I actually heard that. We heard that, and you had to see the looks in the room. Yeah, I mean, and when she said that, I was just like, okay, girl, okay. I think it's one of these things where she had to communicate that. That's her job. That's her responsibility. And this is the platform to do it when you have all of these people in a room. And not only shows that she is part of and sticking up for the press, it shows that, like, we hear you, but now you're right in front of us. Like, you're right here. You have to hear us. Like, and you have to act, and you have to make sure that, like, we have access and we are protected. And so, we heard that at home.
Disha, we don't have a lot of time left, and so I want to make sure that we get get to talk about you and your book for just a minute. I've heard you say of your time during the Obama White House that you were thick with imposter syndrome.
I was. And it's interesting because even with the White House Correspondents' Dinner, I think how the first time I went, I ran out of there fast. I didn't think I belonged there. I got on the bus on the street and went home. And, I was just like, it was one of these things where I just felt like I didn't know anybody in the room. I didn't understand what the Correspondents' Dinner was. And it was, just really eating away at me. But the thing is I did belong there, right? I am a regular person. I am the American people. And so that is the whole, dream about my story about going to the White House as a 31-year-old who had dropped out of college and was in community college. It was like, I needed to go there to represent people and to bring the community there and to tell truth. And so, but I suffered from imposter syndrome because we're in Washington and everyone has this law degree and this, that, and third. And I'm like, I don't have any of that, right? But it turns out that I didn't need any of that because what I did have is the qualities to be social secretary.
Well, come on then. Okay, have a resume.
Yes, the resume.
From imposter to impact.
Yeah.
Ooh, come on, David.
No, I stole those words. I'm saying that's part of the book review.
Yes. Yeah, because I thought that I was just not qualified. And it turns out, being a hip hop journalist back in the day, which I thought was just this random thing, 8 years later, I'm booking hip hop artists at the White House and using hip hop for education and criminal justice reform. So everything that I thought was maybe an imposter had impact.
Deesha Dyer, we wanted to have you on. What a perfect day to have you join us again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
All right.